Hello everyone, it's Nina and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be doing a reading wrap-up of basically all of the books I've read in the last 3 months that I haven't talked about in other videos. I did a Queer Way reading wrap-up that I will link somewhere above, and I also did a journal with me video talking about some of my recent favorite books. So the books I'm going to be talking about today are just the ones that kind of fell through the cracks. I'm going to be talking about these books by genre. I think that will be a little bit easier to organize them versus doing it in order of when I actually read them. So starting off, we have the only mystery thriller book that I read this month, which was If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This book is an adult murder mystery that is set during 2 timelines. There is the present timeline, which is following the main character Oliver. He's being released from prison from the murder of a classmate that he confessed to killing. The lead detective on the case does not believe Oliver was actually the killer, and now that Oliver has been released, he's going to him to kind of get like his tell-all full story of what exactly happened. So the past timeline is following Oliver 10 years ago when he was at this prestigious art college and was in a theater program that focused heavily on Shakespeare. I really liked this book. I did somewhat figure out what the twist was going to be, but I think that was mostly because I watched another booktuber do a reading vlog on this book, and in that video she kind of alluded to who she thought the eventual victim and killer were going to be, and that kind of just like continued to stick with me as I was reading it. This book is definitely more of a character study than a plot-driven book, and really focuses on Oliver and his group of friends in this theater program. I feel like you could see how they came together because it's not really that they necessarily like each other, it's that they were just in a very small group in class. It's kind of that feeling when you first start a class in school, and even though you don't know a lot of people, you kind of are forced to bond because there's kind of this feeling of sink or swim socially. But once the drama happens and one of the classmates dies, they start clinging to each other for emotional support, but also there's a lot of cracks that are starting to show in the very foundation of their relationships. A big part of the secondary drama focuses on Oliver and his relationship to his roommate James. Their relationship and its like sort of amorphous nature. They're friends, they're rivals, they hate each other, but they also love each other. I really love a main duo that has like so many different stages of a relationship and so many lenses that you can look at the relationship through. I also like that this book, I think it's supposed to be set in 2003, and it's kind of has like this uncanny valley effect since it seems still very modern, but there's also very like old-fashioned mindsets in it. I think it just adds to the overall unsettling nature. I think some people have found the constant Shakespeare references to be a little bit hard to work through, and maybe it's just because 2 of the ones that are featured heavily in this book, being Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet, I've read before, so I was comfortable with those parts. But at the same time, I don't think you really have to have a heavy Shakespeare background to still enjoy this book. Maybe there are more deep allusions in the lines that are referenced, but I still feel like I got a lot out of the book without knowing them. This book I think would make a really, really good movie or like a limited series on Netflix or something. The next set of books I'm going to be talking about are the fantasy books that I read recently, and the first one of those is In Deeper Waters by F.T. Lukens. This book is about a prince named Tal who is traveling his kingdom for the first time. Tal secretly has magical powers and he's been kept hidden from the public because his grandfather had the same powers and it led him to become a ruthless tyrant. So Tal has just been spending most of his young life living in the palace under the guise of being sickly. While he's out traveling, Tal's ship comes across a destroyed ship in the ocean, and the only survivor is a boy named Atlan who basically refuses to give them any information as to why he's there and what was happened. The story goes on from there, but Tal eventually gets captured by pirates who are trying to prove that he has magical powers, and Atlan, through circumstances, is the only one who has seen what has happened to Tal and is trying to figure out a way to help him. This book was touted as being very similar to Gentleman's Guide, and I really just don't feel like it has the same vibe, except maybe on the surface level. I think the thing that holds this book back the most is the writing style. I just feel like it was very basic, it wasn't very engaging, and there was too many characters and not enough depth to any of them. I predicted the twist, and at the same time I also came up with like a better twist in my head that I liked more than the version that happened in the book. I ended up rating this 3 stars because there were some things that I really liked. I especially liked Tal as a character. I felt for him and I really liked his personality. I think Atlan was just so annoying though. And I'm like, Tal, you are too good for this boy. I know you're like super baby gay and this is like your first time out in the world, but you don't have to date the first boy that is nice to you. Another thing that's kind of superficial, but the art on the cover of the book is just so incredibly beautiful. This author has another book coming out that's done by the same artist, and I'm like, I don't really want that book. I want a art book just of this artist's work. And it's kind of sad when the book cover is one of the best things about your book. Overall, this book wasn't offensive, it just was kind of basic. I have no real desire to read it again, and honestly I think there's probably better fantasy ML out there to look for instead. The next book we are going to be talking about is Myst, Book of Atreus by Rand and Robin Miller. This book is about Atreus, who is the main character of the Myst video game series. This book is about him growing up, from his birth, his early childhood, and mostly focuses on him when he's a teenager, growing up with his father Gen. In the lore of Myst, there is a race of people called the Dunny who have a magical ability to write things down in books and then use them as portals to go to other worlds. At some point in time, the Dunny civilization was wiped out except for Atris's bloodline. And again, Atris's dad is like, we were so much better than everyone else. We had this amazing power and we were like gods to the people of this world, so we should rebuild the Dunny civilization to show our dominance. And Atris is thinking, well, I don't really believe all of that, but I do want to connect with my history and I'm very creative and good at problem solving, so I'm going to help you out. But as you can imagine, things start going south because Gen is not a very good person. This book is kind of a comfort read. I feel like in rereading it, I was going into it with a little bit of rose-colored glasses, but I can see more of the flaws now. This book is not really well written in the same way that In Deeper Waters wasn't very well written. And I think that comes from the fact that the two main authors are video game designers, not prose writers. So it was harder for them to get the feelings they were trying to convey with just writing and not having an entire world to build around. Overall, I do like this book enough that I want to continue reading some of the other Myst companion novels. Okay, next we are going to be talking about my historical fiction books that I read, and the first one of those is Before We Disappear by Sean David Hutchinson. This book is about Jack and Wilhelm. Jack was an orphan who was taken in by a magician and a con woman named the Enchantress, and she raised Jack to be her perfect assistant. She treats Jack kind of like a mother, but she's got a very hard love type of attitude. Wilhelm, on the other hand, was kidnapped as a child by a man named Teddy. The reason Teddy captured Wilhelm is because Wilhelm actually has a magical ability that lets him be able to disappear and reappear at will in different places, and Teddy gets the idea to use Wilhelm's power for them to start a magic show of their own. And they do this during the 1909 Seattle World's Fair, which is the same location that Jack and the Enchantress are performing at. While the two head magicians hate each other and are trying to outperform each other, Jack and Wilhelm meet, and as soon as Jack learns that Wilhelm is being kept against his will, he's like, I'm gonna get you out of there. This book I did really enjoy. I think the biggest problem for me is it felt a little too long. I think there was maybe 2 or 3 too many dates that Jack and Will went on. And while I do think it was essential for their relationship development, it kind of just lessened the overall stakes. Because there's only so many times the threat of Teddy finding out that Wilhelm has been sneaking out can be held over our heads before we don't really take him seriously. It kind of also felt really on the nose just how awful Teddy was as a person. Not only was he a kidnapper and a criminal, but he's also incredibly racist and sexist and homophobic. And it's just we get it. He is the villain. But the Enchantress was a lot more nuanced. For her, it was I'm punishing you because I love you and I want you to get better and grow from this, which is a lot more interesting. At one point, I was thinking, maybe I'm not enjoying this because I don't really like the writing style, but then there was this scene where Jack and Will have their first kiss, and it's literally the most beautiful, romantic prose I've ever read. And I feel like it only really showed up for the second half of the book. I gave this book 4 stars, and it's kind of a low 4 stars. I think I'm interested more in reading more books from this author in the future. There were pretty strong glimmers of hope in the type of writing he can produce, so I'm interested in trying out another one of his books and seeing if I vibe with it better. Maybe one that's a little bit shorter. The next book we're going to be talking about is The Gentleman's Guide to Getting Lucky by Mackenzie Lee. This book is a quick novella that is more of just a linking book between the first and second books in the Montague siblings series. It sets up Felicity's story in that book, but more so is just supposed to show you the relationship of Percy and Monty now that they've become a couple. I read this in one evening. It's pretty short. It's very cute, and it's very much like a canonical fanfic, if that makes sense. The stakes are low, and it's more about just the overall fluffy, cute vibes. But it's still very well written. There's a metaphor that comes out in the beginning that circles back in the end, so it's very well rounded. Overall, I just like this, and obviously since I love the Montague siblings series, I'm going to read other books that relate to them. So yeah, overall, I'll just give this a 4.5. The next book we're going to be talking about is the only DNF I have on my list, and it is a classic. And that is The Italian by Anne Radcliffe. I talked about this book briefly in a haul video I did. This was a library book that I had gotten out. This book is about a guy who's from a rich family in Spain, and he wants to marry a girl from a poor family. His mom finds out and is like, there is no way that I'm going to let this happen. I'm going to send my monk friend to basically pretend to be a malevolent spirit to make my son leave this girl alone and also get the girl out of the city so they can't be together. There's probably more of the plot, but that's as far as I had gotten to in the story. I stopped reading this because I figured out I liked the monk and its handling of the trope better, and I was like, cool, I don't need to continue reading this. Also, just with the classical writing style, it was really pulling me into a reading slump, and I tried to find an audiobook to kind of supplement that, and it was just really bad and I just wasn't enjoying it at all. So yeah, I decided to DNF this one. Probably won't come back to it, but I might look at other classics to read in its place. The last book we are going to be talking about is the only nonfiction book I read recently, and that is The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. This book tells the story of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair through the alternating stories of two different men, Daniel Burnham, who was the architectural director for the fair, and H.H. Holmes, who was a con man and serial killer who was active during the fair. Burnham's story was a little bit more boring, but one of my biggest takeaways was just like this study of bureaucracy. The fact that everyone just sucked so bad and was getting in the way of each other. Holmes was the story that I was more interested in, but I felt like he needed more character study in the book, because one of the key takeaways I felt like I got from the book was the fact that he wasn't just like a serial killer, he was a con man first and foremost. And although the book tried to make the points that, he got a lot of satisfaction over killing and having power over his victims, it also made it seem like he only killed to further his cons. Like, it was just another aspect of business to him, and I think that's what made it even more fucked up and fascinating than him just killing for, like, the pleasure of it. One of the good takeaways from the Burnham section was that at the end of the book, I was like, I really want to go to Chicago and look at all the old buildings that are still up, and it's really surprising how many parts of modern America kind of got their starts at World's Fairs. Like, the very first Ferris wheel was at this fair, and that was definitely one of the most engaging parts of the book, learning about that. Also, the stylistic choice to have all the fair buildings be in the neoclassical style, which is the reason why so many libraries and banks and other government buildings look like that today. Also, the fact that Daniel Burnham was also on the committee that built the Lincoln Memorial. Yeah, I enjoyed this book. I guess it was not necessarily what I expected going into it, but I still enjoyed it regardless. Maybe there was also the personal connection of the fact that my fiance is from Chicago and I want to learn more about the city that she came from. I think this book actually would be really interesting for someone who's studying architecture, not just someone who's interested in true crime, since this book kind of is pretty evenly split between the two different aspects. So that is it for today's video. I probably will do another one of these in the next 2 or 3 months as I read more books to talk about. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Please consider subscribing if you aren't already. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!